All right, so we're diving into the world of clinical trials. Um, it's a pretty complex process,
Yeah,
you know, taking a drug from like the lab to your medicine cabinet.
it really is.
So we're going to break it down into these different phases.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how all the phases build upon each other,
Yeah.
starting with a small group of people and then expanding out.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, phase 1.
So phase one, it's all about safety,
Mm-hmm.
and how a drug behaves in the human body. And this is where you have a small group of volunteers.
Real heroes.
Yeah, brave volunteers.
Experimento.
Exactly. Often like 20 to 80 people who are healthy, and they receive an experimental drug for the first time.
Wow, so they're really on the front lines then.
They really are. Yeah, they're helping researchers to determine if it's safe to move forward with testing.
Okay, so what are researchers looking for in this phase?
So they're focused on understanding the drug's ADME,
Yeah.
absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion.
Okay.
So basically how the body processes the drug. And then, of course, any potential side effects, even mild ones,
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
It's about gathering crucial safety data before exposing a larger group.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So if a drug passes these checks in phase 1, what happens next?
Then we move to phase two, and this is when we start to include actual patients who have the condition the drug is intended to treat.
Okay.
And it usually involves a larger group, anywhere from 100 to several hundred patients.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah, and safety is still a top priority.
of course.
But now researchers are also investigating whether the drug is effective.
Like a two-pronged approach then.
Yeah, exactly.
We're still monitoring the safety, but also seeing if it works.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where the concept of control groups comes into play.
Oh, the control group.
Yes. So some patients will receive the experimental drug and others might receive a placebo or the current standard of care.
Right.
And this allows researchers to compare outcomes and determine if the new drug actually has a benefit.
Beyond like a placebo effect.
Yeah. Beyond the placebo effects or existing treatments.
Yeah. Okay, wow. So it's a balancing act then.
Right.
Separating out what the drug is actually doing.
It really is.
Yeah.
It helps ensure that the data is reliable,
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's say a drug has successfully gone through phase 1 and phase 2, good safety profile showing promise. Then we move on to phase 3.
Phase three is the pivotal stage.
Okay.
This is where the drug is tested on a much larger and more diverse group of patients, often thousands of participants across multiple locations.
Wow.
Yeah, this helps researchers confirm effectiveness, monitor side effects in a wider range of individuals, and compare it to existing treatments in a real-world setting.
So gathering that robust data that the agencies are going to look at.
Exactly. And each of these phases can take years to complete.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very lengthy and meticulous process.
But it's worth it.
Oh, it's worth it to ensure that new medications are safe and effective.
Okay, that's good to know. So if a drug makes it through all these phases and gets approved, are we done then?
Not quite. That's when phase four comes into play.
Phase 4, tell me more.
So once a drug is approved and it's available on the market, researchers continue to monitor its long-term effects. And they gather additional data on its safety and effectiveness in real-world settings.
Wow, so it's like surveillance then.
It is ongoing surveillance, making sure that the drug continues to perform as expected and identifying any rare side effects that may not have been apparent in the earlier phases.
That's amazing. So it's a continuous learning process then,
It really is.
even after it's already being used.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really striking how much emphasis is placed on safety throughout this whole process.
Yeah.
From the very beginning,
Yeah,
testing it on volunteers to ongoing monitoring.
absolutely.
So safety is the guiding principle.
It is the cornerstone of drug development.
Yeah.
And to ensure that safety, there are these strict regulatory requirements
Right.
that every new drug must meet before it can be approved and available to the public.
Okay, so let's talk about those requirements. What kind of hoops do these drug companies have to jump through?
Well, the process is rigorous. It involves a lot of paperwork. They need to submit a comprehensive application to the relevant regulatory agency, like here in the United States, the FDA.
Right.
And this application is often called a new drug application, or NDA.
Okay.
And it's basically a massive dossier containing all the data from the clinical trials, preclinical research findings, manufacturing information, proposed labeling.
So it's like presenting their case to the court.
It really is, the
Yeah.
scientific court.
Yeah.
And the regulatory agencies have a team of experts who review all of that data,
Looking for problems.
looking for red flags, inconsistencies, any signs that the drug might not be as safe or effective as the company claims. It's a lengthy process, sometimes taking several years.
Wow.
But it's an essential safeguard to make sure that only truly worthy drugs get approved.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They have a huge responsibility to
Right.
protect the public.
Yeah.
So what happens if they find issues during this review?
Well, it's actually quite common for the agency to have questions or require additional information. They might ask the drug company to conduct further studies or clarify certain data points, address any specific concerns they have. It's a back and forth process, you know?
Oh, so it's a good dialogue then.
It is. It's a scientific dialogue, ensuring that every aspect of the drug's development and testing has been thoroughly vetted.
So it's very complex then, bringing a new drug to market.
It is. It's not just about discovering a potential treatment. It's about navigating a complex web of scientific research, clinical testing, and regulatory oversight, all with the goal of improving patient health and well-being.
Well, this has been incredibly enlightening so far. We've covered these phases, the importance of safety and these rigorous regulatory requirements to ensure that the medications are safe and effective. But we've only just scratched the surface.
We've only just begun. There's so much more to explore.
I know.
We haven't even touched on study designs.
Yeah.
And how researchers are always trying to improve the way clinical trials are conducted.
That's a great point. We'll dive into all of that and more in part 2 of this deep dive.
Yes, we will.
Mm-hmm.
We'll uncover the secrets of control groups, randomization, and blinding, and explore how these techniques help researchers ensure the accuracy and reliability of clinical trial results. Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, we've talked about the different phases of clinical trials.
Yeah, but now I'm really curious to learn more about those study designs.
Yeah.
And how researchers actually make sure that the results are accurate and reliable.
That's a great question, because the design of a clinical trial, it's really like the foundation.
Yeah.
It's crucial. If the foundation is weak, the whole structure is at risk.
Yeah, so a poorly designed study could lead to misleading conclusions,
Exactly.
which could jeopardize the development of a treatment.
Yeah, or even put patients at risk.
Yeah, of course. So researchers are really focused then on making sure these studies are designed well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They put a lot of emphasis on creating studies that are robust and, try to minimize the risk of bias.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what are the key elements then of a well-designed trial?
Well, one of the most fundamental things is the use of control groups,
Right.
which we touched on a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So remember how in phase 2 and phase 3, we're comparing the outcomes of patients who get the experimental drug to those who receive a placebo or the standard treatment?
Yes. But why is it so important to have those control groups? I mean, couldn't researchers just see if the patients taking the new drug improve and then assume it's working?
Well, it's not that simple, unfortunately. Imagine you're testing a new pain reliever.
Okay.
You give it to a group of people and their pain decreases. Sounds great, right?
Yeah.
But how do you know for sure that the improvement wasn't just due to the placebo effect?
Ah, the placebo effect.
Right.
Where people feel better just because they believe they're getting a treatment.
Exactly. Even if it's just a sugar pill, the mind is powerful.
Right.
And our expectations, they can have a real impact on our experiences. That's why having these control groups is so important.
Okay.
By comparing the outcomes of those receiving the actual drug to those receiving a placebo.
Right.
Researchers can actually isolate the true effect of the drug, separate it from those psychological factors.
So it's like a benchmark then,
It is.
to see if the new drug is actually doing something.
Exactly. It's all about establishing that cause and effect.
Yeah.
We want to be confident that any improvement we see is due to the drug and not something else.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So are there other ways then that researchers try to, eliminate bias in these clinical trials?
Absolutely. Another important technique is randomization,
Randomization.
which helps ensure that the groups being compared are as similar as possible.
Okay, so does that mean assigning people to groups randomly?
You got it.
Like picking names out of a hat?
Yeah, it's like shuffling a deck of cards to make
Yeah.
sure everyone gets a fair hand. The goal is to make sure that the two groups,
Right.
those receiving the new drug and those in the control group, are balanced.
Okay.
In terms of factors like, age, gender, overall health, and other variables that could influence those results.
So if you had a group of, mostly young, healthy people.
Right.
And then another group of much older people with other conditions.
Exactly.
That could skew the results.
It could make it hard to tell if the differences you're seeing are because of the drug or just the characteristics of the people.
Right.
Randomization helps to minimize that chance that any of those pre-existing differences between the groups will distort the findings.
Okay.
And that allows researchers to really focus on the true impact of the drug.
Makes sense. So we've got control groups and randomization, both really important for minimizing bias.
Yeah.
Any other strategies?
Another powerful tool is blinding.
Blinding.
Which involves keeping certain people in the dark about who is receiving the actual drug and who's receiving the placebo.
So not literally blindfolded.
You got it.
Okay.
It's more metaphorical.
Right.
It's about controlling information to prevent bias. There are different levels of blinding.
Okay.
So in single blinding, the participants themselves don't know what they're taking.
So they don't know if they're getting the drug or the placebo.
Exactly. And that helps to prevent their own expectations from influencing their experience or reporting of symptoms.
Wow. So even the people taking the pills don't know what they're getting.
Right.
Are there situations where the researchers don't know either?
Yes. That's called double blinding.
Double blinding.
Where even the researchers administering the treatments don't know who's getting what.
Wow.
So that adds an extra layer of protection against bias.
Yeah.
Because it prevents the researchers from subconsciously treating participants differently or interpreting data in a way that favors one group over the other.
So it's like next level objectivity.
It is. It's all about letting the data speak for itself,
Yeah.
Eliminating as many sources of bias as we can. So researchers can be more confident that the results accurately reflect the effects of the drug.
Wow. So control groups, randomization, blinding.
Yes.
Those are like the pillars then of a well-designed trial.
Exactly. Working together to create a fair and accurate testing ground for new treatments.
And these principles apply to all phases.
All phases of clinical trials. From the beginning to those large-scale trials that determine if a drug gets approved. It's all about making sure that the data we collect is as reliable and unbiased as possible.
So it's the recipe then for good scientific evidence.
It is the foundation for good science and informed decision-making.
Speaking of decision-making,
Yeah.
I understand that the, traditional clinical trial designs are always being kind of refined and improved.
They are.
And there's this thing called split-phase design
Yes.
that is sort of a new innovation.
It is a more adaptive and flexible approach to testing new treatments, especially in areas where time is really critical, like cancer drug development.
Okay, so how do these split-phase designs actually differ from the traditional way?
So in a traditional trial, you've got a fixed plan from the start. You recruit a large number of participants, assign them to groups, administer the treatments, and then analyze the data at the end.
Yeah.
But in the late phase design, the trial is actually divided into stages. And the data from each stage is used to actually inform the design of the next stage.
So it's more dynamic.
Much more dynamic. Allows the researchers to adjust course based on the information they're gathering along the way.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say we're testing a new cancer drug.
Right.
And there are several potential dosage levels.
Yeah.
So in a split-phase design, the first stage might involve a smaller group of patients.
Right.
Just to figure out which dosage seems to be working the best.
Exactly.
And then in the next stage, we focus on that dosage.
Yeah. With a larger group of patients.
That sounds incredibly efficient.
It is. It can be really valuable when dealing with serious conditions where time is really critical.
Of course. So it could speed things up then.
It could lead to faster answers and more targeted treatments.
It's like a scientific detective story.
It is unfolding in stages,
Yeah.
as researchers gather clues and adjust their investigation.
Based on the evidence.
Exactly. It just highlights how much clinical research is evolving and that drive to find better, faster, and more efficient ways to develop these treatments.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening journey so far. From control groups, randomization blinding, to split-phase designs. It's clear that researchers are doing so much to make sure that their findings are accurate.
Absolutely. It's essential to ensure that the medications we rely on are truly safe and effective. But there's another piece to this puzzle that we haven't discussed yet.
Okay.
The regulatory agencies.
Right.
They play a vital role in deciding which of these new drugs actually make it to market.
That's right. We talked about how important it is to get, good data from the clinical trials.
Right.
But how do they use that data to convince the agencies that the drug is actually worthy of being approved?
That is a great question. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the world of those regulatory agencies.
Okay.
We'll explore the hurdles a drug has to clear before it can be sold.
Yeah.
And how those agencies make sure that patient safety is always a top priority.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We spend quite a bit of time talking of those different phases of clinical trials.
We have, from those early safety studies to, the larger trials that confirm a drug's effectiveness.
Yeah. And then, of course, those study designs, all those things they use to try and minimize bias. Control groups, randomization, and blinding.
Right. It's all about getting that reliable data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now I'm really interested in learning more about, the agencies that have the final say.
Yeah.
Whether or not a new drug actually gets approved. What are they looking for?
Well, the regulatory agencies, they have a huge role. They're safeguarding public health.
Big responsibility.
It is. They act as gatekeepers, making sure that only medications that meet, very strict standards for safety, effectiveness, and quality are actually available to patients.
So can you, walk me through the process a little bit?
Yeah.
What happens once a drug company, they think they have enough evidence for their clinical trials. They're saying, hey, this drug is safe and effective. What happens next?
Well, the first step is to submit a really comprehensive application to the appropriate regulatory agency.
Yeah.
So here in the United States, that would be the FDA,
Right.
the Food and Drug Administration. In Europe, it's the European Medicines Agency, or EM.
Right.
So each country has its own regulatory body.
So it's a whole network then.
It is.
Looking out for everybody.
Global network of these scientific watchdogs, you could say.
And that application itself sounds like a pretty massive undertaking.
It is. It's a lot of work. It's called a new drug application, or NDA.
Okay.
And it includes a ton of data from all the clinical trials, preclinical research manufacturing information, proposed labeling.
Wow.
It's a really big report card.
Okay. So a lot of experts have to look at all this.
Oh, yeah. The agencies themselves have teams of, scientists, clinicians, statisticians, and other experts.
Wow.
And they look at every piece of that information.
So they don't just trust the drug companies.
No. They conduct their own independent evaluation,
Yeah.
digging deep into the data, making sure everything looks good.
That makes a lot of sense. And I bet that takes a long time.
It does. It can take several years.
So it's not a quick process.
No. But, patient safety is the most important thing.
Right.
So these agencies are committed to being thorough.
Yeah.
They'll request more information. Sometimes there are back and forth discussions to address any concerns that come up.
So it's really a debate then.
It is a very rigorous scientific debate to make sure that every part of that drug's development has been carefully vetted.
So at the end of all of this, the regulatory agency, they make a decision.
They do. They might approve the drug as is.
Yeah.
They could request further studies or even reject the application if they believe the risks outweigh the benefits.
Wow. So there are all checks and balances then.
There are,
Yeah.
to make sure that only the safest and most promising treatments are actually approved.
Well, we've been talking a lot about, these new drugs and the process they have to go through.
Right.
What about generic versions of drugs that are already out there? Do they have to go through the same thing?
That's a great question. So generic drugs, they're basically copies of brand name drugs that have already been approved.
Okay.
They have the same active ingredients,
Right.
but they're typically sold at much lower prices.
Yeah. Which is why they're so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes those medications much more accessible and affordable.
Right. So they don't have to go through all those clinical trials again.
No, don't. They have a streamlined pathway called the 505(b)(2) generic ANDA pathway.
505. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah. So NDA stands for Abbreviated New Drug Application.
Okay.
Abbreviated because it doesn't require all that original research, like a brand new drug. The 505(b)(2) part just refers to a specific section of the U.S. law that outlines this pathway.
Okay, so they're essentially leveraging that data that already exists about the safety and effectiveness of that original drug.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They still need to show that their version is bioequivalent, meaning it acts the same way in the body, but they don't have to repeat all those expensive and time-consuming trials.
So it's a win-win. It saves time, money.
It does.
The generics get to market sooner. And it helps patients.
Absolutely. It's a really good example of how these regulatory pathways can evolve, to meet the needs of patients and the healthcare system while still keeping those standards really high.
This has been a fascinating look into the whole world of clinical trials and drug development.
It has.
We've talked about everything from those early safety studies to those complicated study designs, the regulatory agencies, and all those hurdles.
And those pathways for generic drugs.
Yeah. What do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
For me, it's how collaborative this whole process is. There are so many people involved, scientists, researchers, clinicians, patients. the agencies.
Wow.
And they're all working together to bring these new treatments to the people who need them.
That's really well said. It's a great example of human ingenuity and really the dedication to improving health.
Absolutely. And, we've only just scratched the surface here. Clinical research is always evolving. New discoveries and innovations are happening all the time.
Well, this has been really great. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into clinical trials, a journey that's all about hope and progress.
It has been a pleasure.
And, ultimately the pursuit of a healthier future for everybody.